Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the Daily Debate. My name is Ahmed Nader, and tonight we will be focusing on the presidential activities of His Excellency President Abdel Halim on Sunday and in the past week as well, in the past couple of days, as today President Sisi received the Foreign Minister of Russia, Sergey Lavrov, at the Ittihadiyya Presidential Palace, receiving also the greetings from the Russian President Vladimir Putin, and exchanging the means of ways of having a dialogue between Russia and Ukraine to be ending the conflict between both countries. And we will be focusing on the speech made by the Foreign Minister of Russia, Sergey Lavrov, at the Arab League as well. In the other part of the daily debate for tonight, we will be focusing on the European tour made by His Excellency President Sisi in Germany, Serbia and France, and to be focusing and shedding more light on those important topics for today and in the past couple of days. I am honored to be having with me in the studio Dr. Mohamed Abdel Halim, the political analyst. Thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Pleasure, sir.
The pleasure is all mine. We will be starting straight away with the visit of the Foreign Minister of Russia, Sergey Lavrov, and the meeting held between President Abdel Halim and Russian Foreign Minister. More details in the upcoming report.
President Abdel Halim reiterated on Sunday the importance of prioritizing the dialogue and diplomatic solutions to settle the Russian-Ukrainian war. The president's remarks came during the meeting with visiting Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov, as he voiced Egypt's support for all endeavors that would speed up the political settlement of the crisis. The president stressed to Lavrov Egypt's readiness to support the dialogue and diplomatic path via its international contacts with all active forces. During the meeting, Lavrov briefed the president on the latest developments of the crisis in Ukraine and the latest Russian steps at the international level to manage the issue. Recently, Egypt, in coordination with the Arab League, formed a Ukrainian crisis liaison group that held meetings with Russian and Ukrainian officials with the aim of achieving diplomatic solution to end the war. Consequently, Lavrov conveyed to President Sisi a message of appreciation from Russian President Vladimir Putin for the Egyptian initiative to form the liaison group. Furthermore, the meeting tackled a host of bilateral issues. The meeting also tackled means of boosting bilateral ties within the framework of the strategic partnership between Egypt and Russia through the ongoing joint development projects. Additionally, President Sisi praised the level of cooperation between Cairo and Moscow, especially through Russia's projects in Egypt, including Al-Dawa project. Lavrov, who landed in Cairo on Saturday night, was also received by his Egyptian counterpart, Sameh Shoukry, on Sunday at the ministry's headquarters, where they held talks in the presence of delegations from the two countries. The Russian top diplomat's visit to Cairo is the first leg of his 5-day African tour, which include Ethiopia, Uganda, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, according to Russia's state-run RT.
Welcome back. You're still watching the daily debate. Dr. Mohamed Abdel Halim, Egypt is the first leg of the African tour for the Foreign Minister of Russia, Sergey Lavrov. How do you see the importance of putting Egypt first on this tour?
Of course, yeah, it seems to be, occupying pride place among all other visits. Insofar as actually Sergey Lavrov, the foreign minister, or the Russian foreign minister, actually is very much keeping an eye on Egypt in the center of the Middle East, actually, as representing perhaps that decision-taking processes, actually, right from the early start. And in the meantime, that sort of visit would occupy, as I've just said, pride of place among all the other visits, insofar as it comes immediately after, the Jeddah summit, less than 1 week, so to speak, that was to be held actually by Joe Biden. And in the meantime, immediately after his own return, that is Vladimir Putin from Tehran. So it would seem to be quite very much important, I mean, propagating a large number of strategic issues to be discussed on a large scale concerning actually the Russian-Ukrainian war, as much as the situation in the Middle East, including Syria, Iraq, as much as the problematic situation of the food safety and security, as much as the problematic sanctions that are to be imposed actually on Russia, as to be represented by his own today's word actually, or today's speech that he did inaugurate in the Arab League conference today.
Yes, the whole world knows about the conflict between Russia and Ukraine and the military operation that is going on from Russia within Ukraine. So why do you think the Russian foreign minister chose Africa to be having a tour nowadays, specifically Egypt, Ethiopia, Uganda, and the Democratic Republic of Congo now?
Yeah, first Egypt, because as I've just said, that it would play such a very much distinguished, as much as strategic role in initiating and in holding a large number of cooperative initiations actually within the process of spreading peace here, there, and everywhere. And Vladimir Putin actually, as much as Sergey Lavrov would insist every now and again on representing the main fact that the role of Egypt is indispensable actually. It's by no means that actually any single individual problematic situation in the Middle East could be solved without the existence of Egypt. Even those tussling issues of Libya actually, I mean, would necessitate the existence of the negotiating part on the part of His Own Excellency Mr. Abdel Halim. Actually, in the meantime, it seems to be quite very much important for the existence of Egypt, on top of all the examining details, particularly the role that is to be played and being held and pushed every now and again by the Arab League in trying to look for the negotiative route and settling and in sorting out, as much as putting an end for that sort of the military onslaught that is to be directed and initiated on the part of Russia towards Ukraine. And in the meantime, I think that Sergey Lavrov today in his own press conference actually did praise the thanks actually of the very much negative steps and the peaceful talks and the very much interesting details that had been propagated on the part of the Arab League in sending a sort of a high-profile committee actually to try to negotiate with Moscow, to try to discuss and parade on a large scale the issues and the roots of the problematic sort of the tussling onslaughts or the military attack on peaceful means. As much as in the meantime he would praise every now and again the existence of Egypt insofar as we are very much connected with Russia in more than one strategic partnership. We are very much tied to each other actually. That is, for example, El Daba atomic project, as much as the industrial city and the Suez Canal. And he himself actually in today's word actually he did represent in the meantime the inauguration of the first concrete slate or establishment of the first step towards the great and the prodigious project of the Daba atomic project, in much the same way that concerning the problematic situation of the onslaught on Ukraine, he tried to defend himself every now and again, and it seems to be that in today's world that it looks as though that he was justifying the causes and the reasons of his own attack of his own country actually, just by way of defending the social security and the borderlines of Russia, and in the meantime to try to defend the simple rights of the Russian people to protect themselves, depending on representing the geopolitical and the geostrategic borderlines and agendas actually. And in more than one respect, his own inaugurative talk today in the Arab League, as much as in the press conference, would give us all over here, there, and everywhere about his own impression of, representing something to the world community at large, publicly, and in the meantime directing a certain individual sort of message towards America, as much as the NATO, representing that he is not as much as offensive as it would seem to be propagated by America and the western part of Europe, or the European countries actually, the 30 countries, so to speak, actually, that are very much allied and very much defending the causes of America. But in the meantime, he was representing his own defendants of his own individual case of his own national as much as patriotic reasons. To the extent that, from what we know from his own previous background, that he's a very much chauvinist sort of leader, belonging to the self-same school of Vladimir Putin, very much diplomatic, interested in almost in politics since his own early years of childhood. And this is perhaps the reason of the self-confidence, actually, and the certain sense of certainty and the confidence that Vladimir Putin did put in him, the sort of the trustworthiness, actually, that you did, hail him right from the early start to, assume that sort of very much problematic task and arduous step towards inaugurating and initiating a sort of an inaugurative talk in the Middle East, beginning with Egypt, then followed by Ethiopia, Democratic Congo, as much as Uganda in the meantime.
Yes, exactly. As you mentioned, an African tour, and today we did see the speech made by the Foreign Minister of Russia and the Arab League concerning the Ukrainian-Russian conflict. But if we shed more light on the meeting between President Sisi and the Russian Foreign Minister, how they see the stance of Egypt regarding the Russian-Ukrainian conflict and the point of prioritizing the dialogue between both countries, as His Excellency President Sisi put it.
All right. From the early start, His Own Excellency, Mr. President of Sisi is quite aware of, how arduous the task would seem to be, actually. How problematic the issue is, very much negative towards representing the sort of the stance and the decision taking and decision making that should be taken actually at first meeting. In more than one respect, actually, Mr. President of Sisi, did represent the fact that we are never to be biased or prejudiced actually towards this or that sort of camp as being represented by America and the NATO, or the sort of the camp being headed by Russia, assisted by China and other countries actually. But in the meantime, we are very much belonging to non-alignment movement, a sort of representing the language of the mutual identification, the beneficial aspects of representing a sort of give and take dialogue actually, that is mainly based on mutually identifying our own interests in much the same way that the Russian side would get his own or its own benefit actually from the African continent. And I think that sort of fact is being represented by His Own Excellency's previous visit to Belgrade, to Serbia, actually. Yes. Alexander Titovic, actually, is representing in his own very much symbolic talk that we are belonging to the previous early days of non-alignment movement, of Joseph Tito, of Nehru, of the previous late Mohamed Abdel Nasser, actually. It's a clear testimony to the fact that Egypt is neither to be biased to that sort of camp, nor even prejudiced or being very much lenient to the other. But we are getting our own way of our, interests and prioritizing the interests of the Egyptian people. And this is the fact of the language of the politics, actually. Still remember Winston Churchill, when at one time he would represent that there isn't that sort of extreme sense of love, and nor would be any sort of hatred extremely, but it's the mutual identification of the perpetual sort of saying of the interests and the mutual identification with each other. That's why, we are never to be, very much lenient towards Russia, as it would seem to be quite interpreted by a large number of people and would misinterpret it, actually. In one respect, also, His Own Excellency, Mr. Abdel Sisi, during Berlin, Pittsburgh summit, actually, answered one of the journalists, actually, in the press conference, representing that we do have our own simple right, actually, of not giving this for that, of exchanging one sort of item in terms of giving you another sort of another item. It's more than that, it's greater than that. It's a sort of solidarity, it's another sort of cooperative attitude. It's one way or another of bringing the tussles and of ending all the tribulations to just one individual meeting point in which all the people would benefit out of it, actually. That was his own interest that had been propagated in his own, Pacific Climate Change Summit, in much the same way that he is very much keen to represent in today's world, actually, to Sergey Lavrov, we had never ever been very much, pious towards any one-sided individual attitude, or very much there for peaceful means and for initiative and integrative steps, and we had no any sort of objection or deterrence, actually, of transmitting the gas as being very much liquefied when it was to be, sent to the western part of Europe or to the NATO, actually. If it is the only way, actually, to put an end for all the tussles in that problematic area. And such way, he is very much direct and very much straightforward in representing the case of Egypt, that it's a sort of non-aligned tendency towards this or that sort of camp, actually.
Doctor, you mentioned the status of Egypt within the Middle East, within the Arab world and Africa, as this is an African tour for the Russian foreign minister. How do you think Egypt could be mediating between both countries, between Russia and Ukraine, to be resolving the crisis peacefully and through dialogue?
Right. As I've just said, there was a certain high-profile committee, actually, that is to be sent to Moscow, just by way of putting an end for the tussles and the struggles on a peaceful means. But in the meantime, in more than one respect, Foreign Minister Mr. Sameh Shoukry did represent that we're always there for peaceful means, and there will be a great deal of effort, actually, of solidifying, of patronizing, actually, the peaceful talk towards its own final destination, actually. And this is a fact that both His Own Excellency Mr. President Fattah Sisi would insist on and upon right from the early start, as much as his own Foreign Minister Mr. Sameh Shoukry, actually. The language of the mutual identification and the language of the mutual interests and the benefits that are to be very much exchanged between ourselves on the one side and the Russian side on the other is not such a negative way of representing sorts of things. It's one way or another of exchanging the interests and of defending the reasons of our own people in much the same way that Russia would defend, because, Sergey Lavrov in today's words would represent that I am being very much interested in the safety and security of our own people in much the same way that the United States of America, that Joe Biden would seem to be quite interested in the same way with the safety and security of his own people, and much the same way that he would represent every now and again from the speech that he is representing and directing a certain individual sort of message towards America, that we are just being defenders of our own simple rights, of protecting our own border lines, and of representing our own simple right of representing the geostrategic importance of defending the coastal line as much as the border lines of our own Russia. And in the meantime, it seems to be quite, to my own understanding, that he is insisting of representing the Caesarian Empire, actually, the previous glorious days of the Soviet Union that it once had, or that it once was, actually. And since the demolition, actually, of the Soviet Union towards the early 90s, 1991, I think, at the hands of the American administration at the then time, the fact that, both Vladimir Putin and Sergey Lavrov, actually, are very much, keeping a hidden agenda of returning again to the self-same status of grandeur, of greatness, actually, of the Soviet Union that it once had, just by way of defending the borderlines and the safety of their own people in the meantime.
Yes, to be defending the borderline was one of the main points made by the Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov during the speech he made.
Yes, that's what he did say and insist on. Yeah.
Today. How did he see the importance of having a speech at the Arab League today by the Russian Foreign Minister? Because this means that they need the mediation, they need the political efforts of Egypt in specific and the Arab League in general. How do you see this step, not from the African level, but from the Arab League level as well, from the Russian point of view.
That's right. We cannot deny that even Russia has got its own ways and means to get into the heart of Africa. It has got its deep interests within, the African coastal line in Libya, in Syria, and Algeria in the meantime. And in the meantime, the selection of Egypt actually as this certain individual sort of great country within the Mediterranean area actually to be concentrated on and upon is just one way or another on the part of Sergey Lavrov actually of defending his own status in the eyes of the Americans, because he's very much blaming America as much as the West of even not being entitled actually of almost all the Arab countries and the Gulf area, presidents actually to take photos and photograph actually with, Vladimir Putin or even with Sergey Lavrov. This is a sort of a blaming fact, and this is an annoying point of view that he did insist on and upon in today's speech. Yes. And he would defend his own simple individual right and freedom and liberty actually of selecting what sort of country to talk to and what sort of area that you would have to be visiting actually, even Africa, and representing in the meantime that, we have got these mutual interests since quite a long period of time, strategic, cultural, and even literary, even from the early days of late Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, and a large number of cultural details that would connect both camps actually, and would seem to be quite representing one individual interest, which is liberating the views of men and establishing a sort of an individual liberty of speech and freedom of opinions. And this is, I think, that one of the very much interesting fact that I could really understand in his own today's words, the sort of the thing that would make Israel actually, dedicate a certain sarcastic as much as critical, scathing point of view towards Russia in of closing the camps of the Jewish people in Russia, and in the meantime, a sort of a threatening voice that would seem to be quite underlying the fact that Sergey Lavrov is interested in the two-state solution as much as representing his own deep interest actually of defending the simple rights of the Palestinian people,
yes.
excuse me, and the refugees actually of returning again to their own homelands. And I think that His Own Excellency, Mr. President of Tahsis, did seize the chance in representing, his own perpetual sort of cause actually of discussing and of examining and of representing, of parading actually to a greater extent the Palestinian cause and the establishment of the, of the Palestinian state on the borderlines of the 4th of June 1967, and with the capital of Jerusalem, the Eastern Jerusalem actually. The sort of the thing that Joe Biden did omit and overlook actually in his own Jeddah summit. He was asking actually the Saudi people actually to maximize and to overflow the sort of the oil to a greater extent, just by way of, compensating for the sort of the extreme sense of loss as being necessitated by sort of the estrangements and the sort of the alienation between the Russian camp and the American, but to no avail, because he seems to be quite endorsing the existence of the Jewish people within the Jerusalem. He didn't tackle actually even the problematic issue of returning again of the American embassy to Tel Aviv instead of being in Jerusalem. He didn't tackle that sort of thing. He didn't tackle the two-state solution. He didn't defend the simple rights of the Palestinians, of the border, of the refugees, of the defending the settlements and establishments of the Jewish people. And as such, it seems to be an absolute sense of failure. And even, all the media and all the journals actually in America would represent how an absolute sense of fiasco, the journey and the outcome of it was. That's why I think all these, very much interesting details and very much, resourceful facts of the sense of the failure of Jeddah summit actually would seem to be quite very much utilized from the foreign minister Sergey Lavrov actually insisting every now and again on discussing and examining the perpetual nightmarish sort of aspect of returning again, of establishing of the Palestinian state and of the return of the refugees to a greater extent actually to their own homeland.
Yes, you've mentioned the role of the United States in the political scene globally. We recently in Egypt celebrated 8 years under the tenure of President Abdel Halim politically and in the file of foreign affairs. How do you see the balance made by Egypt between the East and the West, between Russia and the United States?
We cannot deny that we have got some, agreements and strategic partnerships actually with the American side. Yes. But to a greater extent, at one time actually, the American administration would frown on Egypt, representing every now and again through the Congress and the voting by the congressmen, actually to minimize and to, to detract the Egyptian worthiness actually of getting weaponries and of modern means of technological aspects actually. That's why, His Excellency, Mr. President, actually would seize the chance of the multifarious diversifications of getting the weaponries actually, sometimes from France, sometimes from China, sometimes from Russia to a greater extent. That's why, I see to no avail actually that, the sort of the agreement now with America would detract it from the worst, from fortifying our own ammunition actually with something of a great modern technological details from the Russian side as well. That's why it was a very much resourceful and balancing step on the part of His Own Excellency, Mr. President of Sisi, actually of not to be very much pious or even lenient towards to this instead of that, or to that instead of this, or in lieu of that. And this is very much resourceful way of balancing the way to deal with both sides and both camps without representing any sort of de facto leniency actually towards just one single individual sort of camp. It's the language of politics. It's the language of the mutual identification with the other countries. It's the language of defending our own simple rights and mutual interesting details actually. That's why I wouldn't see any sort of obstacle in getting some ammunitions actually and weaponry from America, in much the same way that we are very much tied with some strategic partnership with Russia, such as I just said, the DABA atomic program, yes, and the industrial city within the Suez Canal, and many other projects actually, such as getting the grains and the wheat and the monorail to a greater extent, and defending and extending the sort of the trains and developing a large number of details concerning the daily usages of the people here in Egypt. So, it seems to be quite a balancing step towards benefiting from the sort of side of camp in much the same way that we can really get the self-same benefit from the other without distorting actually the whole meaning and the sort of the ultimate diplomatic tendency actually towards both sides actually.
Yes, during the meeting today between His Excellency President Abdel Halim and Sergey Lavrov, the Foreign Minister of Russia, they both stressed on the importance of having the strategic ties, the bilateral strategic ties that we currently have between Cairo and Moscow. How do you see the timing of this statement that we have special strategic bilateral ties between Egypt and Russia?
It seems to be quite important, particularly as I've just said, it came to be in less than 1 week of the Jeddah summit, and in much the same way after his own return of Vladimir Putin actually from Tehran, as much as the cooperative side with Algeria in the meantime, and in much the same way that it seems to be of a great deal of importance because it paved the way for, perhaps once he finalizes his own visit in Egypt, Sergey Lavrov actually perhaps will be directing towards Ethiopia. Yes. That's why I think we could really get benefit actually from the deep interest of Russia, despite the fact that we'd have to be very much cautious because at one time in the National Assembly he was at one time endorsing the Ethiopian establishment of the Renaissance Dam, the sort of the thing that would be very much blaming to our own interests and our own mutual, but we are still hoping actually of being able to get benefit from the very much critical situation that Russia is passing through, particularly the large number and the wide extreme number of sanctions that are to be imposed, till you find that the circle of danger is narrowing and narrowing upon Russia by 30 NATO countries as much as the titanic existence of the United States of America and the sort of the diminution and the sort of the dominion of the American administration on a large number of European countries, I could really think that no matter how forceful and very much prudish the sort of the attempt on the part of the Russian administration, it wouldn't be able actually to keep going, struggling and alive and kicking actually, and getting its own interests in the face of 30 countries plus America without the advancement and the helping power and interference on the part of Africa as being represented by the Egyptian presidency actually. Particularly, I mean, he did mention in more than one respect that during the chairmanship of Egypt of the African Union, it did pave the way for paving the way for solving a large number of problematic situations, as much as representing how peaceful initiations on the part of the Egyptian presidency to solving the problematic situation of the Renaissance Dam without any military interference, despite the fact that, a large number of, agencies would propagate that the only solution would seem to be quite looming large there through the military interference. But far from being so, we had been very much giving a very good and very striking example of how peaceful, the initiation of the Egyptian presidency would always be here, there and everywhere, the sort of the thing that would strike the admiration of almost all the Western European nations, including actually Russia. That's why I think that sort of today's visit actually is very much important so far as it would pave the way for solving the next station, the next step, which is the problematic issue of the Renaissance Dam, particularly when he opted for Ethiopia to be his own second station actually.
Yes, Doctor, we will be heading to the second segment of the daily debate for tonight, which is the visit made by President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi in the past week to Europe, and more specifically to Germany, to Serbia, and then to France. We have more details in the upcoming report.
President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi met over the weekend his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron in Paris for talks aimed at tightening a relation based on security and defense ties. Macron hosted President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi at the Élysée Palace days after hosting UAE leader Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan. With growing concern over the effects of Russia's invasion of Ukraine on global food supplies, the pair discussed ways to deal with the economic, energy, and global food security consequences of this conflict. Egypt is due to host the COP27 climate summit in Sharm el-Sheikh in November, and Macron and President al-Sisi also discussed the fight against global warming. The two presidents took stock of the main issues of bilateral cooperation, which are very dense in all areas. Macron has, during his rule, placed considerable emphasis on relations with Egypt, and during a state visit in December 2020, gave President al-Sisi France's highest award, the Grand Cross of the Legion of Honor.
Welcome back. You're still watching the daily debate. Dr. Mohamed Abdel Halim, we will be starting from the end or the conclusion of the European tour from France, as President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi met the French counterpart Emmanuel Macron. How did you see the importance of this visit at this time and the outcome of it?
This particular individual sort of state visit on the part of His Excellency Mr. President Fattah al-Sisi actually is very much important, particularly at this particular stage, insofar as it seems to be quite a preparation for the COP27 actually, that's to be held in Sharm el-Sheikh next November. And in the meantime, in the light of the previous meetings and the previous deep interests actually on both sides, that is the French side as much as the Egyptian one, the deep interest in try to defend and solve the problematic issue of the climate change, the extreme sense of heat and the extreme sense of emissions that are to be propagated the sort of the thing of which the whole world would seem to be quite blaming of. And Mr. Fattah Sisi is very much interesting of representing that the most harmful spot or area of the world that is to be very much influenced by the extreme sense of hate is Africa and the African continent. Yes. And in this respect, he seems to be quite as he much, and in more than one respect, that he is speaking in lieu of the African countries, the African continent, and in the following, period, the period that is to be following the COVID-19, the epidemic of the COVID-19, after a stoppage for about a couple of years, factories are restarting again, and all major firms are to be re-establishing their own interests for a second time, reproducing a large number of carbon dioxide and harmful gases, actually, that would maximize the sort of the whole of the ozone layer, actually, and the decay that does exist over there, representing in the meantime a threatening danger of which not only Africa would be quite facing, but actually the whole world. But what seems to be quite interesting on his own Excellency's part, the fact that he would underline, if now and again, that Africa is not to be blamed. Yes. The Arab world are far from being blamed to a greater extent, and they would have to pay for it, the European world, so to speak, as much as the American administration, because, the sort of the maximal degree of danger that is to be, exposed every now and again is to be interpreted in terms of to be returning again to the American as much as the Western people. This is very much important as a preparation for the COP27. Emmanuel Macron also is very much praising the very much peaceful integrative steps that are to be taken on the presidential level by representing how the important aspect of the Egyptian mutual identification and negotiation would be very much solving and helping to solve a large number of tussles and issues such as the Palestinian cause, representing his own promise that it will be discussed on a negotiating table in this near future, and much the same way that he would indeed praise the sort of the attempts on the part of the Egyptian presidency of trying to minimize the sort of the problematic issue of the climate change, and by turning the Egyptian efforts actually towards the green and very much clear powers and energies as a sort of an alternative for the very much polluted source of vengeance and effusions that are to be reproduced on a daily basis by European world. That's why it seems to be a very much successful journey in which the presidential French side did praise every now and again, the initiation of the Egyptian presidency actually to a greater extent.
Speaking of the journey itself and the Petersburg dialogue which took place in Germany before the visit to France, as preparing for the COP27 which will be taking place in Egypt here in November in the city of Sharm el-Sheikh, or the Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh. How do you see the importance of having the COP27 for the first time in Africa, for the first time in the Middle East and the Arab world, in Egypt, this time to be speaking about the future goals of fighting climate change?
Right, so Berlin was the first integrative step, followed by Belgrade. But it seems to be quite occupying a very distinctive sort and of importance, insofar as Berlin had always been there, not only within the process of the climate change as a sort of a preparation for Sharm el-Sheikh's session, but in the meantime, during the course of the previous 2 years, because a large number of summits were to be held in Berlin, trying to consummate and trying to inaugurate and solve the problematic issue of the Libyan problem, of the Libyan militias and of the sort of the chaotic experiences of the militias within the Libyan side. Despite the fact that Berlin did fail in more than one respect actually to reach to a peaceful solution concerning the Libyan cause and case, actually, it seems to be quite at this particular occasion very much successful in receiving the great deal of efforts and of appreciating the integrative steps as much as viewing and regarding the coming of His Own Excellency Mr. Abdel Sisi as one very much active step towards actually, solving a nightmarish sort of case of which the whole world actually is to be blaming of actually till the very moment of speaking. That's why I think that Berlin was a very much successful stage and integrative station, actually representing one major problematic position that is to be, discussed and examined and hopefully to be solved actually in the due course of time next November in Sharm el-Sheikh.
Yes, and finally, in a couple of minutes, because we're running out of time, the journey, it was politically motivated upon a number of invitations made by the presidents of France, Serbia, and the Chancellor of Germany. But on the other hand, President Sisi also shed light on the importance of having more investments into Egypt, of having better financial and economic relations between Egypt and Germany, Egypt and Serbia, Egypt and France. How do you see the outcome economically of this European tour in the near future?
You can really detect, the hidden causes and reasons actually of the journey of the visit from the, from the tendencies actually and from the number of ministries and the number of those official employees actually that start to be very much accompanying his own presidency. The fact that I think the economic side and the political dimension would seem to be quite very much identified with each other, each of which would seem to be quite completing one another actually. That's why I think that the economic side and insistence of getting into economic partnership is very much important as much as the strategic partnership is, and it is what His Excellency is very much stressing every now and again. To a greater extent, we have got a large number of bilateral ties, economic relations and strategic partnerships and mutual, treatments and economic stabilities actually that are to be inaugurated between the Egyptian presidency on the one side and Berlin, Belgrade and Paris on a third dimension actually.
Yes, Dr. Mohamed Abdel Halim, the political analyst. Thank you very much for being with us tonight on the Daily Debate.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure is all mine. And this brings us to the end of the Daily Debate for tonight. Thank you for watching and goodbye.